Dean Catherine Baker to share some thoughts with our graduates. Dean Baker?
As Dean of the University of Chicago Harris School of Public Policy, I have the great pleasure of welcoming the graduates of the class of 2021 to this year's hooding ceremony.
Yeah!
Give yourselves a round of applause. Though our traditions may look a little different this year due to the pandemic, I couldn't be happier to be here in person with you today as we recognize your accomplishments. It has been a long, hard, hot road to get to this moment, but you have earned it. I'd now like to introduce David McMillon, who will give the student speaker address.
Yeah!
David McMillon is a Ph.D. graduate of the class of 2021 with master's degrees from the University of Michigan in Applied Mathematics and in Industrial Operations and Engineering. His involvement at Harris includes tutoring and teaching for multiple courses, helping to redesign math camp and advocacy work. His research has received recognition through the Spencer Dissertation Fellowship, the AERA Minority Dissertation Fellowship, and invited talks at UVA and Boston College. In July, David begins his tenure-track career as an assistant professor of economics at Emory University with a visiting scholar position at the Federal Reserve Bank in Atlanta, Georgia. Congratulations and welcome to the
Thank you, Dean Baker, for that very kind introduction. First, giving honor to God, who's the head of my life, and I should also recognize my family, mom and dad, and Morgan, Josh, William.
Yeah, bro!
There's really a lot of people I want to recognize. I love all of you. There's just like so many friends, like in this audience, and you know, my dissertation committee, so many great faculty who supported me. I really appreciate all of you. I want to say something that has been on my mind for a long time. All of my efforts in pursuit of an academic career and to use my knowledge to reduce human suffering can all be traced back to timeless memories with my grandfather, Joel McMillon.
Yeah.
Grandpa was my hero, but more than anything, he was my friend. I remember skating with him when I was just 4 years old, and I was afraid to skate. I actually still am. I cannot skate at all. But when I held his hand, the fear just disappeared. I knew he was going to protect me, and I never forgot that feeling, the sense that someone was looking out for me. But it's more than that. When I held his hand, I wanted to be like him. I wanted to be strong enough to protect someone else. And that's the unique kind of love, influential love, that flowed between us. It characterized our relationship forever and lies at the brightest core of everything I've ever wanted to be and everything that I am. Grandpa suffocated to death. The man responsible for my spiritual optimism died ultimately because he could not breathe. And so my tower of strength and hope and resilience was reduced to a frail old man with despair etched between shallow breaths, saying, "It wasn't supposed to be this way." Grandpa died of a disease that can be preventable through evidence-based practices, but which is deadly in the face of short-term solutions that are too little too late. At Harris, we learned that our impact extends far beyond the sphere of our intentions, and that's exactly why it's so important that we ensure our policy solutions are evidence-based. Yet once the evidence has been established, what was once a question of analysis becomes a question of the soul. We don't like to talk about that in the classroom, but once the evidence has been established, our true moral character is laid naked, stripped from the cloak of objectivity that our privilege so conveniently affords us. And at that time, there's no mathematical model that can liberate us from the binary moral decision at our feet once the evidence has been established. And we understand rigorously how to dismantle the systems that suffocate others. We are forced to choose between what is right and what is convenient. And how dare we, of all people, have the audacity to choose the convenience of inaction? Apathy, after all, from the supposedly learned, is far more heinous than the harm caused by the unlearned. In any case, it would seem that everything that could have been learned from our inaction must have been learned by now. The year 2020 was about watching the whole world suffocate to death with no remorse and no long-term solution, starting with the earth itself, from issues with carbon emissions. No remorse, no long-term solutions. Then a pandemic struck based on a virus that attacks the respiratory system. No remorse, few long-term investments in public health, and in the midst of it, we watched George Floyd suffocate to death for 8 minutes beneath an officer with no remorse, and still we see no long-term solution. And as protesters lined the streets of Minneapolis and Chicago and other major US cities, tear gas filled their lungs, administered with no remorse and no long-term solutions. You know, as someone with so many family members and friends who suffocated to death from COVID-19 and from lung cancer and from asthma, I have to say there is nothing more painful than watching a doctor offer a short-term solution that is too little, too late. But each of those loved ones, including Grandpa, would agree with me now when I say that in the grand scheme of things, we cannot breathe without each other. We cannot breathe without remorse for those who suffocate, and we cannot breathe without long-term solutions. We cannot breathe without radical collective investment in clean energy to clear the lungs of the earth, and we cannot breathe without investment in public health systems to protect us from airborne pandemics. But not only that, we cannot breathe allowing the US military-industrial complex to take the breath away from innocent brown people abroad. Yes, I went there. We cannot breathe allowing the noose of the prison industrial complex to choke black families, to choke black wealth, and to choke black mobility. We cannot breathe allowing the legacy of colonialism to block the airways of self-determination within the island of Puerto Rico and the US territories. We may have come on different ships, but we're in the same boat now. We cannot breathe with the noxious fumes of anti-Semitism, nor the searing smoke of anti-Palestinian racism. We cannot breathe with the toxic stench of anti-Asian hatred, nor the haze of LGBTQ marginalization. We cannot breathe, drowning in a violent ocean of sexism, human trafficking, gaslighting, rape, and gender-based violence that impacts women every day. We cannot breathe focusing only on symptoms and short-term solutions, and we cannot breathe without actively fighting the root causes of our societal asphyxia. In the last year, we watched in horror as 3 million lives were lost to systemic policy failures. We learned that all the knowledge and all the evidence in the world isn't nearly enough to save the world. What do we do with that, faculty, students, staff, at the Harris School, where we pride ourselves on impact down to a science, where we've chosen to put our faith in the evidence instead of something greater than the evidence? Was our time here meaningless? Was our achievement here meaningless? Are we meaningless? We are not! We are as meaningful as our actions. It is our actions that give meaning to our knowledge. It is our advocacy that gives bite to our analysis. It is our active campaigning, our persuasive debating, our implementation that gives fire to our research. And fighting for what's right and acting on what's right gives true meaning to knowing what's right. Class of 2021, long after this pandemic has come to an end, I implore you to fight actively and openly for evidence-based policy, not just its analysis. Fight until our moral prowess guides our scientific evidence. Fight for long-term solutions to cure our societal asphyxia. And fight on again until the moral lungs of the earth are filled with the living breath of justice. Thank you.
Fight.
Thank you, David. I now call upon Dean Catherine Baker and the designated faculty